The sexual revolution in China is underway, but not without its contradictions. The sexless China over 3 decades ago is long gone, but gays still enter sham marriages. Some women have hymen restoration before their weddings, and some men have ernai or a second wife. In an interview with CNC, Richard Berger, author behind The Red Door, Sex in China, explains the ongoing Chinese sexual revolution. So you've said that China is undergoing some kind of sexual revolution. What are some of the signs?
Well, I think everywhere you look in China, you see a blossoming sexual revolution. From the way people are dressing, you could think you're in Paris, they're wearing sexy clothing. Women are getting plastic surgery to make their face sexier. You'll see 2,000 different sex shops in Beijing, 200,000 sex shops in China altogether. Now you'll see young couples, especially in the urban areas, walking down the street holding hands. And that was literally unthinkable even 10 or 15 years ago. And we're seeing people becoming less and less inhibited about sex all the time.
And how different is this sexual revolution from that of the West?
I think they're dramatically different. If we look at the West, our sexual revolution really exploded in the late 1960s, where suddenly pornography was legalized. We had shows on Broadway where the actors were naked on the stage. It was all about self-expression and having sex with whoever you want. In China, it's more restrained, and the government does have a say in how far people can go sexually. I told you there are 200,000 sex shops in China. None of them have pornography. That's still completely outlawed by the state. So the government draws these red lines that you aren't allowed to cross.
And how do you think the internet has changed China's sexual values or attitude towards sex?
Well, I think it's made the Chinese much more aware of sex, and it's certainly helped to sexualize the country. Young people now can meet easily, even if they're a long distance apart. They join dating sites. There is still pornography that you can find on the internet. So wherever the internet goes, it changes society tremendously. In China, it's been rather unbelievable. There's probably no other example of a country so affected. There's another thing the internet has done, and that's made it easier to report cases of sexual abuse.
And how do you think the Taoism and Confucianism are different from each other regarding their values about sex?
Yeah, Taoism and Confucianism started at about the same time in the Zhou dynasty. Confucianism is a set of practices that's all about filial piety, reverence for the father. It's all about the structure of the family, very hierarchical. So Confucianism, it is not a daring, bold type of philosophy that Taoism is. Taoism, instead of being about your contribution to the state and to your family, is much more about personal improvement, how to live longer, how to enjoy sex more. And there are many, many Taoist manuals that are incredibly graphic, that go into amazing detail about how to stimulate your partner, how to siphon off what they call the yin essence of the female partner, and how to save your own yang essence. The woman's essence is yin, the man is yang. Confucianism, on the other hand, says almost nothing about sex. Confucius seemed neutral about sex. He did say that sex is of a great importance as a human necessity, but we think from what he's written that he believes sex should be confined to married couples. He was open-minded about concubines, especially if the male had no sons. Then he saw it as okay.
And how do you think these values kind of still influence today's Chinese society?
I don't think Taoism has a lot of influence on today's Chinese society. I think Confucianism is still everywhere in China, and it's still the basis for how people look on the family, on their own lives, on the state. In Confucianism, it's so important that the children get married to continue the family lineage. And now some people like the Xinhua are not getting married so early, and that's why the government and society is so hard on them, because it's your duty as a Chinese person to find a wife and to bear children and make your contribution to the state. And that's directly from Confucius.
And throughout China's sexual history, its attitude towards sex kind of changed dramatically from extreme openness in ancient China, maybe before Qing dynasty, to a period when sex became a taboo between the 50s and 70s. Yeah. And now the atmosphere is more ambivalent.
In the Tang dynasty, yes, extremely open. Prostitutes were licensed by the state, and it was administered by the state. Starting in the late Song dynasty and going on for several dynasties, it got more and more conservative. Women were not allowed on the streets. Laws were passed against homosexuality and adultery. Most of these were ignored. Then under the Qing, the repression became really serious. And a woman, if she was raped under the Qing, she was supposed to commit suicide. They called them chastity martyrs, and they would be revered, because being penetrated by a man's penis was considered the worst possible thing that could happen to a woman if that man wasn't her husband. Under Mao, the curtain really fell down. Men and women wore the same gender-neutral clothing. You couldn't conceivably talk about sex and desire outside of your bedroom. And it was a time of sexlessness, where any discussion of sex was considered Western spiritual pollution. So that all changed with reform and opening up. We had some huge social changes. You had migrant workers moving to the coast by the millions. They needed to have sex, so prostitution began to blossom again, and bit by bit China became more liberalized.
And we know that traditionally China has a shame culture, and how has it impacted China, the sexual conduct in China?
Chinese men in particular are very, very uptight about face and about who they date and who they marry. They expect a woman to be of a lower social rank than themselves or the same, and he expects her not to be making as much money as he does. And it's a loss of face if you are dating a woman who's seen as a higher achiever than you are. Now this is, again, old Chinese thinking from even centuries ago, where the role of the man and the station of the women was set in stone. The man was the head of the household, the man made the money, and so there's that conflict today where, again, they're becoming liberalized, but they're still pulled back by old traditional Chinese values.
What do you think of the obsession somehow with women's virginity, particularly when it comes to marriage?
I open my book with a discussion of how thousands of women every year go to hospitals in Beijing and Shanghai and other big cities for an operation to restore their hymens. Now, if the woman can't afford it, she can go to one of China's 200,000 sex shops and buy an artificial hymen that drips synthetic blood when it's punctured. Now, the king of pop, Cui Jian, actually, he was so offended by this obsession with virginity that he created a short film called Repairing the Hymen. And he said that this belief that your wife has to be a virgin, it's anachronistic, it's sexist, and it's altogether wrong. And of course, I totally agree. A woman can rupture her hymen naturally, horseback riding or something, but the male wants their girlfriends to have premarital sex with them. They want their wife to be a virgin, and they can't have it both ways.